I see a lot of people get burnt out because they approach podcasting as a separate thing from their business and they don't know how to integrate it into what they're currently doing. And so they don't get results from the podcast. It might be fun for a second, but after a while of doing this, paying somebody to do it and putting your time and energy into it, and you're not getting anything back, that's what leads to people burning out. What's up? I'm Angie, and you are listening to Podcast That Pays, the podcast for online business owners who want to grow their business and sell their offers using podcasting. If you like no fluff, tell it like it is advice from a marketing-loving podcast agency owner, you are in the right place. So glad you're here. Let's dive in. Welcome to Late Nights with Ange. Just kidding. You're listening to the Podcast That Pays podcast in case you thought you were in the wrong place. But I am having a late night session of recording and I am drinking a glass of wine. And so I just thought I would bring you a little bit into my world. That's what we do it tonight, as we are going to talk about the last piece of the secret sauce, which I hate that I called it that, but okay, it's the secret sauce. The last piece of that, which is making your podcast a part of your marketing strategy, of your existing strategy. So let's get into it. One of the biggest mistakes I see people make when they are doing their podcast is they approach podcasting as this separate thing from their business. They approach podcasting as, you know what, I'm going to start a podcast. And this is the problem, that it runs through every piece of this. Like, they're not thinking about selling. They're not thinking about positioning right. They're not thinking about the content. They're just thinking about, like, let me hop on the mic, like Late Nights with Ange, and like, let me just talk about whatever thing I want to talk about. And I get it. It's so, if you saw my relationship with this microphone, I love it and I want to caress it. And I get how good it feels to be on the mic. I get how good it feels to have a platform where you can just be you. You can just talk. You don't have to think about what you're posting. You don't have to get the hook and blah, blah, blah. Like, it's so unadulterated and freeing and it feels so good. So people just want to say whatever. And people just want to start a podcast so they can like be themselves. And I'm not saying that you can't, but what I'm saying is I see a lot of people get burnt out because they approach podcasting as a separate thing from their business and they don't know how to integrate it into what they're currently doing. And so they don't get results from the podcast. It might be fun for a second, but after a while of doing this, paying somebody to do it and putting your time and energy into it, and you're not getting anything back, that's what leads to people burning out. That's what leads to people fading out, the pod fade. That's what puts your podcast in the podcast graveyard, is when you don't know how to incorporate it into what you're currently doing and you can't see results. So like, best case scenario, you figure out how to incorporate the fun, the creativity, the being able to express yourself. Best case scenario, you figure out how to do that and scratch that itch and incorporate it into your existing marketing and business and what you're doing so that it makes sense and also feels good to you. That's the best of both worlds. That's where I'm always trying to get my clients to. It's like, it has to feel good. It can't feel so clinical and like, okay, I got to do XYZ robot. So like, that's why like a lot of people who are like trying to follow my advice down to the T, I'm like, dude, there's room for nuance. There's room for you to be you, but also let's also make this smart. Let's also make this a part of our marketing. Full disclosure, I am going into this new phase where I'm going to start marketing and selling some offers that are a little bit different than what I'm currently doing. It's going to require me to change my messaging a little bit. You want to know the first thing I do when it comes time to like change my messaging or like talk about something new to my audience? I create podcasts around it because that's how my mind works. Because I get to come here and express myself and be free and unscripted, so unscripted. And then I get to take those ideas and that content and talk about it in other places, without having to come up with original things. It's like I'm just taking from what I already talked about. And it's so freeing and helpful. And now I've given my content double duty, which is what we're going to talk about, right? So what do we mean by making your podcast a part of your existing strategy? What I mean is what we want to do in our marketing, what we want to do in our business is we want to attract new people. So how do we use our podcast to attract new people, grow our audience? How do we use our podcast to nurture our existing audience? And how do we use podcasts to close business, to sell to the people? Hey, if you're listening to this and you're thinking to yourself, I really need to up my podcasting game, or you want to start utilizing your show more for your business to get more leads and sell more offers, then I want you to come over to podcastthatpays.com and check out the Podcast Collab Lab. That's podcastthatpays.com and check out what we're doing over there. I would love you to join us. Okay, back to the show. That is what I mean, that you should, in your current strategy, however it is that you do right now, however it is that you attract, nurture, and sell to people, how about when we're creating this podcast, we incorporate that into it? So what do I mean by that? I mean, as a growth strategy, how are you growing your audience? Well, let's grow our audience with our podcast. Let's grow our audience with podcast growth tips, podcast growth things. I have an episode brewing for that, by the way. And so you can listen all about different growth hacks. I taught on it today. Not hacks. I'm not going to say hacks. I think the shit ain't a hack. The shit is like dedication and time and energy and long game. Like the growth game in podcasting can be a really long game. And it's about building out, solid foundations. But how do we use it to grow? So I give you an example, and this is just a little example, about how we use our content. Even when we're sharing our podcast on social media. Instead of saying, hey, come listen to my podcast on Apple, right? How about we lead with like a guide, like that was one of my workshop goers. I guess that's what we'll call it. A workshop goer. One of my workshop goers, we're talking about this. And I was like, you know what? A good way to share your podcast would be like, here is a guide. Here is 3 ways to recover after the birth of your child. How to recover, what to expect after your birth. I think that's what it was. And then we're going to take 3 episodes and put them all together on a landing page, like a blog post landing page. And we're going to direct people in the link in the bio to a guide. You want a guide on what to expect after you give birth? Here. And then they come to this page. They've got this information. It's 3 episodes. So now we've got them listening to at least 3 episodes because I got to get the full training. They're going to get a win out of it. They're going to know where to go when they come to our podcast instead of just like, ooh, I don't know where to start. Right. And now our podcast has done double duty. So now maybe someone who didn't know us, maybe they want the guide. We attracted somebody new with the guide, or we nurtured somebody with the guide, and then we have them in our funnel. So that's something that we can do. That's just an example of a way that we can give our content double duty to help us attract. Another way is, we can do guest podcasting, and we can use our story. We can use our story to drive people back to our podcast. So those are just little examples of like how we can build our audience through podcasting. So what are you currently doing to attract new clients? Can you add in what you currently do? Maybe your ads, if you like to do Facebook ads as the way you attract clients, maybe your Facebook ads are going to the guide for your podcast. Maybe your Facebook ads are going to your podcast episodes. And so that's using your podcast in conjunction with what you're currently doing. Because again, when we get people to your podcast, and we can get more people to your podcast, like remember, those people are going to be your warmest people. So it's always beneficial to get your people to your podcast. How are we using our podcast to nurture people? Well, before I recorded the last episode I recorded today, I literally dropped a link. I dropped something on Facebook and I was like, hey, if you want to know how to sell more from your podcast, let me know when you want the link to this. I just did an episode about it. So I'm going to give these people who are wanting to know that, they're raising their hand, they're saying that they want this, and I'm going to shoot them a link and nurture them. They're going to get to see my perspective, right? So I'm using it in that way to nurture them. You're naturally going to nurture everyone. As soon as this episode drops, it's going to send you a notification that a new podcast came out, a new episode came out from my podcast. If you're subscribed, if you follow it, and then you're going to come and listen, you're going to be nurtured. Maybe you already purchased from me. Maybe you're waiting for another offer to come around. Who knows? But I'm using it to nurture. And then how do we use it in conjunction to how we're selling with the people? So part of my funnel is you come to once you're in my podcast, I sell you some shit. I sell you into the membership, and then I have a funnel from there. But podcasting is a part of that. So I want you to just think creatively. How can you use your podcast? How can we use our content to do double duty also? So pieces of your episodes, some of your episodes can go into pieces of your funnel. If you have a welcome sequence, a great thing to do in your welcome sequence is send them to podcast episodes that talk about who you are, that talk about like what you stand for, so people get an idea of who you are and what you stand for. You can also create episodes around people's objections, why they don't want to work with you. So then when people actually have objections, you can send it to them. Or that can go be a part of your funnel. That can be a part of, you send someone your initial, they're in a welcome sequence, and then you send them your offer, and then you send them your objection episodes, right? So when you think about how you maximize your content, how you put your content to work for you, because that is what's going to allow you to be able to dedicate the time back to this podcast. So let the podcast do some heavy lifting so that you can then say, you know what, I'm going to dedicate my time. Just like I said, when I start something, a new thing, or I need to create new messaging around something, I start here. So now all I'm doing is I'm dedicating my time to my podcast growth and my podcast. And then I'm just taking what's here and I'm just going to go repurpose it in other places, right? Point people back to my podcast, but it's doing work for me. And if you're not having your podcast do work for you outside of your podcast, you are missing a huge opportunity to save some time, save some energy. This is why you could see that if you're not doing it this way and you're literally keeping these two things separate, how you can burn out so quickly, because it's like you're creating two separate pieces of content and work for two separate things. Because doing a podcast is work. It's work. If you really want to grow it and you're really digging into it, it's going to be work. You are not going to just wake up one day and have a successful podcast. You are going to have to put time, consistency, energy, learning, money into doing your podcast if that's what you truly desire. So in order for us to and it's a great platform. So it's a beautiful platform. And so many people love it, but they just can't figure out how to make it work for them. And so I'm telling you, one of the ways that it works for you is when you let it work for you, you put it to work literally in your business. So think about that when you're creating content. Think about that when you are, sharing your content sharing your podcast on social media. It's like how we're not just like, hey, come listen to episode 29 of my podcast, but we want to replace us having to think about what we're doing on social media with our podcast. That's how we're going to maximize this content. So from this episode, I can create 20 posts that is talking all about how to make your podcast part of your existing marketing strategy. And it's all going to come from what I'm talking about here. So I'm going to talk about attracting, nurturing, selling, how to do each one of those things from your podcast, what that looks like, why you should do that, why you should, let's start conversations around that. And that's what I'm going to be using for social media. Right now I'm recording this on video. So eventually, like I can take some of these videos and repurpose them and use them for social media, for content. I'm maximizing the time that I'm spending here on late nights with Ange, drinking my wine. I'm maximizing that so that I can free up my time and my energy and stay doing the things that I love, which is this, sitting here in front of this microphone, versus all the things that I don't love, which is trying to figure out how to make this real, how to say the right thing in this content, how to make sure that people are like, notice me, how to get this hook right? Those are things that are like not my thing necessarily, but this is my thing. So if you really want to focus on growing your podcast, you need to think about how can you free up the time that it takes to do everything in your business? How does this incorporate in a smart way? How is this? We were doing a workshop goer today. We were talking about, she was like, well, I guess my fear is like that nobody is going to listen to my podcast, that I'm going to do this podcast and no one's listening. And you know what my advice to her was, or what I told her, and it just like took everything away. I was like, well, number one, that's not true. Number one, there's like always a market and always someone who's interested in something. Like you can go to OnlyFans and see like the fetishes that people have. There's a market. There's someone for everyone. There's some flavor for every person out there. Okay. You can put your toes on there. People are going to like it. You can send people your dirty draws. They're going to like it. Like there's something for everybody. All right. So the fact that to say that you assume that no one's going to want to hear what you have to say is ludicrous. But the thing that really hit home is when we talked about how even if not one single person listened, the way that you set your podcast up to be the anchor of your content, the way that if you set this up in the right way, and now we have our podcast content, now that from each podcast episode, we're creating 20 pieces of social content. We don't have to think about social media content. We're taking it all from this one episode right here. We're putting that in our funnel. We're letting our podcast do a lot of our heavy lifting and our content creation for us. That alone, if not one person came and listened to your podcast, is going to be worth it. Is going to be worth you creating this. Is going to be worth you taking the time to do this. If you are integrating this podcast into your business in the right way. And she was like, yes, that's exactly what I want. Like, yes, give me more. Like, you're right. Like, let me do this. Let me create this. And let me back up a second, because I said in the right way. So what that means is, and it's very hard for me to give you I'm giving you examples, but I can't tell you what to do in your business. I don't know what your strategy is. I don't know who your clients are. You can definitely hop on a call with me and I will tell you, and I will give you a plan once I know what you're doing in your business. So what I mean by right way, I mean the way that feels best for you, the way that's right for you, the way that's really going to work for you in your business. It's deeply personal. I can't tell you exactly that. All I can tell you is use your podcast content to repurpose, use your content, try to maximize it every single place that you can, make it work for you, do double duty. That's how you're going to stay in this game, unless you've got a team and lots of people to do lots of things for you, because it gets to be a lot. It gets to be too much, to be honest. Truly, it's a lot. So if you want to stay in this game, you don't want to be burnout, you don't want to have a pod fade, then figure out how to make this a part of what you're currently doing. If you're not sure how to make this a part, come and hop in my DMs, Angie M. Jordan. Let's get on a call and let's figure it out for you. Because this is the most important piece of it all. Because this is the piece that's going to help you stay consistent. This is the piece that's going to help you get the results, even feel like you're getting results, even if no one's even listening, right? This is the piece that you need. So I hope you take this to heart. Hope you enjoyed this episode. As always, come over to Angie M. Jordan and chat with me. Let me know what you think about Late Nights with Angie. Should I start that podcast? I'm going to go finish my wine right now, and I will see you in the next episode. Hey, if you enjoyed the show, head over to podcastthatpays.com to get started on your way to creating a podcast that pays. And don't forget to follow this show and take a screenshot that you were listening and tag me on Instagram at Angie M. Jordan. I'd love to meet you and show you some love over there. Thank you so much for being here. I love you. Let's get this money.